In a secluded corner of Texas lies a land seemingly forgotten by time. The scorched, barren grasslands stretch endlessly, with scattered, weathered wooden houses under a silent night sky where the pale moonlight barely illuminates a rugged dirt road leading to a place shrouded in mystery, an old church. This church once served as a refuge, a safe haven for orphans during a devastating epidemic in 1920. Stories recount how the children's laughter once lit up the stillness of the surroundings, and hymns sung from within brought hope to a world drowning in despair. But then, the epidemic changed everything. The children never left that church, at least not on their own feet. Since then, the church has been abandoned. Time, dust, and chilling rumors have turned it into a place no one dares to approach. Locals swear they've heard strange noises, footsteps, and even singing echoing from within its walls on Christmas nights. In 2016, on Christmas Eve, the singing returned. A familiar hymn resonated through the stillness of the night as if beckoning someone. But when curious townsfolk came to investigate, they found the church doors firmly locked. No one could enter, and the inside was completely empty. And that was the beginning of a story the entire village would never forget. In the village, the story of the old church and its haunting hymn had become a chilling legend. Every Christmas season, the elders would gather around the fireplace, recounting the tale with mysterious glints in their eyes. That hymn, an old man murmured in a low voice, echoes every Christmas Eve, a hauntingly beautiful carol. But don't let its holiness fool you. Once you hear it, it will haunt you forever. These words sowed both curiosity and fear among the younger generation. A group of 3 friends, Jason, Emily, and Kyle, decided to test the legend. They didn't believe in ghosts, nor did they think an abandoned church could produce a song. All we need to do is go there, record everything, and prove this is nothing but baseless gossip, Jason said confidently. Emily, hesitant but unwilling to be left out, agreed to join. Kyle, ever stubborn, scoffed at the elders' warnings. They're just trying to scare us. Ghosts? Ridiculous. On Christmas Eve, they set out. As they approached the church, the atmosphere grew eerie. The surrounding grasslands were unnaturally still, their footsteps crunching loudly against the quiet earth. And then, the singing began. At first, it was faint, like a whisper carried by the wind, making it hard to discern whether it was real or imagined. But the closer they got to the church, the clearer it became. It was the same familiar carol the villagers had spoken of, but this time, it felt different. The voice was pure and melodic, yet carried an unsettling chill, as if it came from a distant, sorrowful place. They stood before the church, staring at its massive wooden doors. They were tightly shut, the rusted iron lock showing no signs of recent use. And yet, the singing continued, resonating through the still night. It sounds so close, like someone is standing just inside. Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jason shone his flashlight on the door, inspecting the area. Kyle, unshaken, banged on the wooden surface. Is anyone in there? But there was no reply. Only the hymn persisted, unwavering and uninterrupted. We need to go inside, Jason declared firmly. Emily hesitated, her unease growing. I don't think this is a good idea. Something about this feels wrong. But Kyle had already circled the building, searching for another way in. There's a broken window on the other side. We can get in from there. None of them realized that this decision would change their lives forever. The 3 approached a small window on the side of the church. Its glass was shattered, with broken shards scattered on the dusty ground. Jason shone his flashlight inside. The interior was pitch black, faintly revealing rows of old, dust-covered pews. I don't like this place, Emily muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb something lurking in the shadows. Jason climbed in first, followed by Kyle and Emily. Once inside, they immediately felt the difference. The air was much colder, as if the temperature had been drained, sending shivers through them despite their thick jackets. The flashlight's beam swept across decayed walls. Faded, peeling religious paintings barely held their form, and thick layers of dust blanketed the pews like snow. But the most unsettling thing was the singing. It hadn't stopped. "We need to find where this sound is coming from," Jason said firmly, though his tense expression betrayed his unease. They walked past the rows of pews, their footsteps creaking on the rotting wooden floorboards. Emily lagged behind, constantly glancing over her shoulder, as if sensing someone watching them. Suddenly, she gasped, pointing at a pew beside her. "Jason," she whispered urgently. "Look at this." Jason directed his flashlight to where she pointed. There, on the dusty surface, was a small handprint. It looked like a child's, and it was fresh, as if it had just been placed. "Probably just rats or something," Kyle said, attempting to sound nonchalant. But even he couldn't hide the growing unease in his voice. As they moved closer to the altar, the singing grew louder. It wasn't coming from one direction, but seemed to envelop the entire space. "There's no one here," Jason said, his voice dropping. "But the singing, it keeps going. Like it doesn't need anyone to sing it." Reaching the altar, Jason noticed a small wooden chest placed at its base. The chest was old, its lock rusted beyond repair. Jason knelt, straining to lift the lid. Emily stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the chest was an old journal. Jason carefully opened its brittle pages, revealing faded writing that told the church's story. December 12, 1920. "The epidemic has reached the village. The children are all infected. There's no medicine, no food. We've done all we can, but..." Jason skimmed through, his voice trembling as he read the final entry. December 25, 1920. "Tonight, the children sang their final hymn. I watched helplessly as they passed, one by one. We locked the church to prevent the disease from spreading, but they never left. Their souls remain, waiting endlessly for salvation." Emily covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Kyle stepped back, his eyes wide with fear. "This can't be real." "It's just a story," he said, as if trying to convince himself. Before they could react further, a loud sound echoed from above. They instinctively looked up, the flashlight beams darting across the ceiling. In the flickering light, they saw shadowy figures, children, standing on the rafters, staring down at them. "Get out of here now," Jason shouted. But as they turned to leave, the singing abruptly stopped. The air fell into an oppressive silence. Then, a soft giggle echoed from the darkness, freezing the blood in their veins. But just when they thought they had escaped the nightmare, an even more horrifying truth awaited them. The silence after the faint giggle froze all three in place. Emily clutched Jason's arm, trembling, while Kyle frantically swept his flashlight around. The beam found nothing but the thick, oppressive darkness enveloping the old church. "We have to get out of here now," Emily whispered, her voice choking with fear. "Wait," Jason said, his attention fixed on the journal in his hands. He flipped through a few more pages, ignoring the terror tightening around his chest. On one page, he saw a single line written in much darker ink than the rest. "The souls remain. Don't let them touch you." Jason looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "We can't let them get close to us," he said, his voice urgent. At that moment, a faint noise echoed from a corner of the church, like something being dragged across the rotting wooden floor. The three turned toward the sound, their flashlights converging on the spot. There they saw a small figure. It was a child, thin, frail, dressed in tattered clothes. Its face was obscured by shadows. Who's there?" Kyle stammered, his voice shaking. But the child didn't respond. It simply stood there, tilting its head slightly as if studying them. Then it began to move, stepping forward one small, deliberate step at a time. Emily screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a wooden pew with a loud crash. Kyle's flashlight flickered, the light dancing erratically across the walls. Jason pulled Emily to her feet, but when he looked back, the child was gone. "We have to get out of here now," Emily shouted. Jason and Kyle didn't argue. They quickly ran toward the window they had entered through. But as soon as they turned, the entire church shook violently, as if an earthquake had struck. The singing returned, louder this time, overwhelming, saturating every corner of the space. "No, this can't be happening," Kyle yelled, as he watched the pews shift on their own, aligning themselves in neat rows that blocked their escape route. In the dim, flickering flashlight beams, shadows began to form. One by one, the children appeared. Ragged clothes, hollow black eyes, and twisted faces emerged from the darkness. They lined up along the pews, filling the church until there was no empty space left. A voice rang out, cold, sharp, and unrelenting. "You are not allowed to leave." Emily burst into tears, clutching Jason's arm as he tried to stay calm. Kyle stumbled backward, tripping over a broken plank, and fell to the floor. He looked up to see a child standing directly in front of him, its vacant eyes boring into his. Jason grabbed Kyle, pulling him up. His eyes darted to the advancing figures, which seemed to close the gap with every flicker of their flashlights. "Run! Head for the window!" he shouted. They sprinted toward the window, but the flashlights continued to flicker. Each time the light returned, the figures were closer, moving faster. One child reached out, its small, pale hand stretching toward Jason. He felt an icy chill shoot down his spine as the hand nearly brushed against him. "Hurry!" Emily screamed, climbing out through the window first. Jason pushed Kyle up and out, then scrambled out himself. The moment they escaped, the window slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash, as if to declare that they were never to return. But that was not yet the most terrifying thing they would have to face. As the three bolted out of the church, they stopped to catch their breath in the freezing expanse of the field. Emily collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down her face. Kyle, still trembling, turned to glance back at the church, where the faint moonlight illuminated the shattered windows. Jason, still clutching the old journal, opened it, his face etched with worry. He flipped to the final pages where the writing seemed newer, the ink darker and harsher, as if someone had hastily scratched it onto the paper. "You should never have come here." Kyle stepped closer and yanked the journal from Jason's hands. He flipped to the next page, and all three froze in shock. Written there was a list of names, all crossed out except for the last three. Those names were Jason, Emily, and Kyle. Emily broke into sobs, screaming in terror, "No, this can't be real, this can't be happening." Kyle hurled the journal to the ground, his eyes wide with panic. "What is this? Who's messing with us?" Jason bent down to pick up the journal, but before he could act, a loud sound came from the church. The main door, the one they knew had been securely locked, was now slowly creaking open. Inside, the darkness was absolute, but they felt an icy draft spill out, brushing against their skin like an invisible hand. "We need to get out of here now," Jason shouted. Before they could flee, a faint light appeared inside the church. At first, it flickered like a candle, but it grew stronger, illuminating the doorway. Within the glow, shadowy figures emerged, children with blank faces and hollow eyes, standing in the church aisle. The singing began again, louder and more forceful than ever before. But this time, it wasn't a hymn. The melody was distorted, shrill, like muffled screams twisting their way into their minds. "You are never allowed to leave," a voice echoed, merging with the discordant singing. Emily screamed, covering her ears as she tried to run from the church, but her legs felt rooted to the ground, unable to move. Jason and Kyle rushed to pull her along, but now all three could feel an invisible force dragging them back toward the church, refusing to let them go. The shadowy children began advancing, step by step, their small, pale hands reaching out as if to touch the intruders who had violated their sanctuary. Jason, Kyle, and Emily pushed themselves to the limit, running with all their strength away from the church. But the invisible force pulling them back made every step feel heavier. The shadowy figures of the children now filled the church, lining the windows, perched on the rafters, and gathering at the main entrance. "Hurry!" Jason shouted, shoving Kyle and Emily forward. But as soon as they crossed the barren ground in front of the church, an icy wind surged toward them, almost knocking them to the ground. Emily glanced back, her eyes widening in terror. From within the church, the children's figures began stepping out. The dim light spilling from the church illuminated their distorted faces, hollow eyes, and outstretched pale hands reaching into the night. "We'll never get out of here," Emily sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Keep running," Jason yelled, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the dirt road leading away from the church. Kyle ran ahead, but he suddenly stopped when similar figures appeared on the path before them. They stood silently, blocking their escape. "Damn it!" Kyle shouted, spinning around to look for another way. The singing grew louder behind them, echoing through the air like a relentless storm, threatening to overwhelm their minds. Jason scanned the area, gripping the journal tightly in his hand. He flipped back to the final page, where a single, hastily scrawled line stood out. "Let the souls rest." "Emily! Kyle! We have to go back!" Jason yelled. "Back! Are you insane?" Kyle shouted, his face pale with fear. "If we don't do something, we're gonna die here. They won't let us leave." Jason insisted. Reluctantly, they turned and headed back to the church. The shadowy children still surrounded them, watching from every direction. But as the three crossed the threshold of the church, the figures stopped moving, no longer advancing. Jason approached the altar and placed the journal on top of it. He closed his eyes, whispering a prayer, though his voice was drowned out by the deafening singing that filled the space. Then suddenly, the singing stopped. An eerie silence fell over the church. The shadowy figures vanished, leaving behind the cold, empty sanctuary as it had been before. "What just happened?" Emily whispered, still struggling to comprehend what they had endured. As they stepped out of the church, the light inside flickered one last time before fading into complete darkness. The next morning, when the villagers came to check on the church, they found the doors still locked, the rusty padlock untouched as if it had never been opened. But on the steps outside, they discovered the old journal. On the final page, a new line had been written. "They have found peace, but this place will never belong to the living." Since that night, the old church became a haunting tale that no one dared to speak of. Yet, those who lived nearby swore that every Christmas Eve, if one listened closely, they could still hear a faint hymn echoing through the air, the carol of souls that would never find peace. Do you believe in mysterious stories like this? If you want to explore more haunting horror tales, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any videos. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you dare step into a place like this? Thank you for watching, and see you in the next chilling story.